Welcome everyone to the Cyber Criminals, Industrial Cybersecurity and Digital Safety webinar sponsored by Velta Technology. Today we're joined by three of Velta Technology's industry leaders, Dino Busalacci, their CTO, who brings over 3 decades of global experience across IT, engineering, and industrial control systems with companies like Rockwell Automation, Anheuser-Busch, and other global organizations. We're also joined by Jim Flutterjohn, who oversees client engagement and has extensive digital transformation, system integration, and IT, OT experience globally with companies like Cisco, Rockwell Automation, and many other vertical industries. And Craig Duckworth, who's an executive vice president with Velta Technology and has experience across technology, security, banking, and gaming, as well as industrial cybersecurity and digital safety. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things for all of us. You guys are all on mute, so you're, I'm sure, probably aware of that. We're going to run the webinar approximately 35 to 45 minutes with time for Q&A at the end. So you can submit questions on the in the chat area, and we'll get the questions as you send them in. We're recording the webinar also, so you will receive a copy via email. So we hope you enjoy the webinar. Let's get started.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dino Busalacci. As you can probably tell by my background, I am located in St. Louis, Missouri. As Lou had mentioned, my background is kind of deeply rooted in technologies, covering over 30 years in the industrial space, working for large corporations in manufacturing and also technology companies. So today we're going to cover what cyber criminals and attacks on control systems mean today, and what we work in and the environment that we're in. Vulnerability is commonly overlooked in this arena. Process integrity, which is really relevant to OT professionals and people responsible for operations. You're going to hear us use the term OT today for operational technology. Those are groups of individuals that are responsible for plant operations, engineering, maintenance, and support of critical infrastructure, manufacturing environment, which is really what we're going to focus on today, versus transportation and other industrial environments that we're not really looking into with what we're doing. And we're wrapping around what we call the digital safety journey. Cybersecurity is a big term, means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so we bring it down into an environment of safety, because safety is everybody's responsibility. And we're talking about digital safety specifically, and how that relates to cybersecurity. So looking at the landscape, from a digital safety and cybersecurity, it's complicated, right? A lot of you are probably pursuing Industry 4.0 enablement technologies, things that are around preventive maintenance, workforce enablement, safety, machine learning, AI, asset tracking, OEE, which is overall equipment effectiveness, performance, how well do you run your manufacturing environment, real-time quality. You've all heard the term IoT. We kind of focus on industrial IoT, is what that extra I stands for. You've heard of 5G and what that means to the environment, the autonomous vehicles that we hear a lot about, sensors being out there. The world will demonstrate, leveraging that 5G network. And at the same time, we've seen increased threats on the landscape, into these particular assets, not just on the business system side, but a lot of it is over the last 15 or so years has really started focusing on the industrial environment. And it's not just so much cyber threats as much as it is, again, back to that process integrity and just human error, and having visibility into this space, right? And then you got the geopolitical instability. We got a big event going on next week, as you all know. And then it's just, who are our foes out there, that whether it be competitors, nation state actors, or just criminals that are looking for ways to improve their bottom line and doing what they're doing to create chaos out there. And there's a shortage of skills, right? It's really hard finding folks that have the background around OT and cybersecurity, because it's not an area that they spend a lot of time on, because their environment's typically been isolated. So when you look at these machine centers, these manufacturing environments, the skills around security have always been based around either physical security in just pure isolation, which is really not the case anymore. These things have been connected for a lot of the reasons, jumping back up to Industry 4.0, why that environment has changed the landscape, right? Attacks are easier. They're easier to gain access to this type of equipment. It's cheaper to buy hacking tools today. They're on the open market, the dark web. These people get these tools that are available to them readily, that are out there, and they've been successful. And we see them every day. There's plenty of articles out there that you can read and follow up on describing attacks that have happened in the environment. And we're going to touch a little bit about the OT-IT convergence. It's where where IT is tasked with a lot of cybersecurity responsibilities and playing a bigger role in this space, and how is that working, and how are they joining together, and what that brings with both sides connecting their environments, and then you have other platforms coming onto the market space, so cloud, software as a service, and then we get back into these industrial Internet of Things. So security is top of mind, all right? So $2 billion in losses. We're attending Cisco programs this week. They're looking at it, moving up to $6 trillion in 2021 as far as the cost in this environment. 68% of the professionals say security is their biggest challenge of IoT. Most of you folks that are on our webinar today are probably thinking, why am I here? Why am I listening to this? And what role do you have? And then an interesting one, again, was something we picked up from one of the Cisco sides, is the self-medication of CISOs, right? It's very difficult for them, right? Especially when it comes to the OT space, because it's out of their control. They have no visibility into that space. We call it the box. What's in the box? When it comes to that IIoT environment or the control systems. I've witnessed CISOs that moved on just because they weren't able to get movement out of their organization, get the funding that they needed, get the resources that they needed, bring in the technology and tools that they needed to do a better job of securing their environment, and decided they weren't getting anywhere and didn't want to be hung out to dry, and they would just leave. They would leave their posts and go find someplace else to work. So it's a very complicated environment, and there's a huge emphasis on how do we secure our OT assets and getting into our control system space. The OT folks, they're a few years behind, right? And at the same time, you have an explosive growth of devices coming onto the network, right? So when you think of the Internet of Things, or the industrial Internet of Things, 29 billion devices. You'll hear the term 50 billion getting connected to the network. As the 5G networks grow and the amount of sensors that get out there, autonomous vehicles, don't forget the consumer market. We see the same thing in the control system space. And it's quite staggering, the amount of assets that you'll find in an industrial environment compared to the number of assets that a IT organization is responsible for, and it's being managed by a lot less people. I'm going to stop there for a second. Craig or Jim, is there anything you guys would like to add?
No, I think you covered it, Dino, right? I mean, part of the biggest challenge I think that customers are faced with right now is, hey, when you look at all these assets that are going to be connected out in the environment, obviously that visibility is going to be huge. And that's where a lot of customers are kind of looking for the start of that digital journey that we're going to get to later on in the deck, of how do we provide some of the different tool sets that are vendor agnostic around being able to provide the whole digital journey that we'll talk through.
Yeah, it's important, as we walk down this, to recognize, like you said, the 29 billion or the 50 billion connected assets that are coming with the advancement of 5G, which just here in St. Louis, every single carrier is promoting 5G, 5G, 5G. I've seen it from AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile as it begins its rollout, and how that's going to affect the manufacturing and the environment that we play in. It's critical.
Right. And there's another group. When you think about that OT environment, there's also the machine builders, right? So you got the OEMs, the other equipment manufacturers, and the system integrators that are out there. And these are the organizations that typically bring industrial technology and systems into manufacturing environments, right? So they're building these things, and they're putting networks in there and computers in there and sensors in there, and they're bringing these into an environment, to an organization that's already strapped for resources, doesn't really have the responsibility for cybersecurity. It's not their problem, right? You go in there and talk to them and start describing cybersecurity, they're going to point their finger back to IT, to the CIO, to the CISO, and it's their responsibility. And it's really not, right? Again, that's why we kind of look at it from a digital safety perspective, right? Because safety is everybody's responsibility. And we've seen this, transformation in the OT space with just physical security. You guys have all witnessed it with the PPE and the requirements to secure those environments and make them more safe. And now we're talking about, well, how do you do with those digital assets that are out there, right? Because if you look at it from an IT perspective, what do they do all day, every day when it comes to cybersecurity? Patch, 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 patch. That's what they're trying to do, is keep patching going. OT, they don't do that. They might not patch an asset for several years, if at all, right? The OEM may not let them because it changes the dynamic of how that machine might perform in order for them to support it. So, when you look at the crime of information loss, business interruption, which we've seen massively this year in 2020 with the pandemic, and the change that it brought about with remote access that people needed to have cobbled together something, didn't have a big plan, and they needed a big plan, but it's like, well, now how do you secure control assets? Because now you're letting people into that environment, right? And of course, the loss and the equipment damage. So there's a lot of things, these machines are expensive. If they're not running, it's very expensive, right? So, when you talk about digital safety, again, in the industrial environment, you got antiquated systems, again, that are not patched. Their legacy, when somebody spends 30, 40, $50 million on a piece of equipment, they expect it to sit out there for 20 years, maybe longer, right? So they've been out, and security was not thought of when they built these machines, right? They were insecure by design, right? They don't, and now we've gone from silos and fragmented environments to connected, right? And that visibility, what's in the box. And, I use this term a lot. I had a colleague that kind of looked at it, who's a CIO, who comes from this environment. And what is in the box? Because the IT tools are incompatible, right? They don't have the visibility to see past PLCs, intermotor control centers, or know what HMIs are in the SCADA environment, or DCS systems. They don't know what those things are. They don't know what's in the box. And so they stop at a certain point. And we'll show you, for those of you that are familiar with what we call the ISA 95 model, or the Purdue Industrial Logical Model, kind of gives you a line of demarcation of where these assets are, where IT stops and OT picks up, right? And the business needs aren't changing, right? Everybody wants real-time information, shop floor to top floor, right? It's been going on for a long time, OEE, MES, in feeding the ERP system with data, to determine a better job of forecasting and planning and buying materials, et cetera, and how you distribute logistics and all of that stuff. So the connectivity in this environment has just exploded with all of these assets, right? And then we come down to the skills gap, because the OT guys are not cybersecurity professionals. They don't have the tools, they don't have the budget, they don't have the resources, and they've got thousands and thousands of these assets scattered around a plant floor. Again, a 15-to-1 ratio between OT assets and IT assets in an environment, right? Change control, manufacturing environments, a lot of them, they're 24/7 by 365. They don't work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, like a lot of the business groups do. Your back office environment. So you still have a lot of need on support and activity and monitoring in that realm. And then again, access control, the COVID event of 2020 has really changed, how people get into this environment today. The old VPN connectivity through the firewall, punching holes in it, are not sufficient, and so the next step is, well, how do I secure this environment? What do I need to be doing, right? And then those are some of the things that we'll talk about a little bit when we get into the mitigation plan, and how do you get to that day to determine, what is my posture? So this is a little bit of a recap of kind of what we went through already, right? We talked about firmware upgrades, software upgrades, and the patching, lack of visibility, again, what's in the box, insufficient network boundaries, the gray area between IT and OT. Like I said, sometimes IT will throw up a firewall and say, I'm good. I don't care what happens on down in that space, and I'm protecting myself from that environment. And at the same time, you have no idea what's going on in the environment. We've seen plant managers and engineers put in their own internet connectivity into the environment, so their OEMs and SIs can get in, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, all of that stuff that moves in, multiple network cards on their control systems that expand their networks down there, and they just bleed out and all over the place. And IT has no visibility into it, doesn't even know what's going on down there. And sometimes you got CISOs and CIOs that they might be okay with that. They don't want to know, right? What they don't know doesn't hurt them. But when it comes to a safety conversation, well, that's a different conversation we have, right? Same thing with monitoring of those assets, and learning what they are, being able to profile every asset that you have out there that's connected to the network, right? What is it? What's it doing? Who's it talking to? What language is it using? What kind of network architecture and technologies and topologies do they have out there? What are the tools? What are they? How do they manage it? How do you work with the OEMs and SIs, right? Because it's rare, and I've been in many meetings where we're buying a new packaging line or putting in a new powerhouse or doing a brownfield or a greenfield event, and we're talking to these system integrators and OEMs. IT's not even in the room. The only time we called IT was to get an IP address and maybe some switch ports, and that was the extent of the relationship, right? And that's the dynamic that's got to change in this IT and OT environment. There has to be more accountability and responsibility, but from both sides. And so that's what you'll see a lot of organizations trying to drive this IT OT convergence and make it collaborative and aligned and transparent and seamless is what it should be. And you're going to see that, and you're seeing this not just from the conversation we're having today. Your conversation we're having today, you'll hear this from everybody. You'll hear this from Microsoft. You'll hear this from Cisco. You'll hear this from Rockwell. You'll hear this from Siemens, Schneider Electric. So even in their world, they see this IT/OT convergence coming together, and it's required in order to really do this right? Because we gotta get our OT environment up to where the IT environments are today, and they're 15 to 20 years behind in a lot of cases. So, and when it comes to how do you deal with it? How do you manage what you're not measuring, right? If you can't see it, then how are you going to manage it, right? How are you going to determine what the calibration is in regards to the security of assets in your environment? So, and how do you remediate and mitigate? Now that I have this data, what can I do? Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it could be a simple patch on something to upgrade. It could be something simple as a misconfiguration and removing insecure protocols or insecure protocols and misconfigurations of connecting devices that shouldn't be in the environment, and change that versus having to swap out and spend millions of dollars just to replace a control system because I'm running Windows 7 on the HMI, or the engineering workstation that they're using to program these devices. So there's that extreme on one end where you got to rip and replace, which is not feasible. And then there's what can you do, but you're not going to be able to do anything until you get a pretty good idea of what you have. All right. Craig, Jim, anything to add?
I think two key areas, if you go back a slide for a second, Dino, on why it makes it so complicated is, and we have this kind of in bold there around ownership. There's two key critical areas on why I view digital safety so complicated and so challenging for a lot of enterprise-wide customers is because, first of all, it's a cultural thing, right? With a lot of the things that we talk to customers about with PLCs or this or that, that's very defined. It's not a cultural thing. The ownership sits with the OT people that are laying out those systems. When we're talking about something around digital safety that's enterprise-wide, that touches the OT space, it becomes very gray because ownership, who owns the asset? If a SCADA system is sitting out there and it's running on an industrial PC, then obviously the IT guys go, well, it's an industrial PC, we own that. But the HMI or the OT guys will say, well, that's a SCADA system, we own that. So there's a lot of gray areas, as we say. But also, let's not forget, Dino, that culturally things need to change. And that's why you're going to start seeing a lot of companies move towards having like a chief digitization officer that can kind of help bridge that gap a little bit and drive a little bit more of that standardized culture that needs to be there when we talk about things like digital safety and cybersecurity enterprise-wide.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good point on the ownership, because that is a biggie, on the ownership side, on who owns the asset at the end of the day usually dictates what we're going to do to it. and culturally that thinking has got to change to some extent, right? Just like any other business unit, if you're sales or if you're HR or if you're accounting, the systems you use may be yours to use for the business functions that they are, but all of that underlying application, operating systems, the infrastructure in which it resides clearly belongs to IT and securing those assets. It doesn't belong to accounting. It belongs to IT. But when you get into the OT spaces using the same technologies, maybe calling them something different, SCADA system, DCS, PLCs, HMIs, they're still computers. And they're still running on a network. They still have firmware and OSs on them. And the question is, who's better suited for securing those assets, or at least being responsible for the security, communications, and posturing, and how we mitigate and plan to determine how we're going to do a better job of securing these assets. Here we talk a little bit about, what we've been touching on is the differences between IT and OT, and what's priorities to them, right? Confidentiality, privacy, standards, high levels of connectivity, multiple layers of controls and telemetry that belong to IT. And then you flip it around and OT is worried about performance and availability, so safety is number one. Safety and availability are always number 1 and 2 in any manufacturing environment. If you go in there and talk to the OT professionals, what they're striving for, it's those 2 things, right? Got to be safe, and I got to do the best I can with the assets that I have to make them perform, to make the goods that we make for our consumers and our customers, right? And they're special, meaning that their environment is special. They use special protocols, right? It's devices. They got legacy stuff that's something that's been out there. You heard me mention Windows 7. It's not uncommon to find Windows XP out there, sometimes NT4.0 still out there. PLCs have been around for 30 years in these environments, right? And so as the environment starts colliding, it's like, well, how do we manage this environment? What's in the box, right? So
one other thing on that particular one, the last bullet you had there on the OT side, I think is also very critical. Obviously, little to no visibility is key and will become part of the start of the digital safety journey. But also the other thing we want to weave into that conversation a little bit is around, what is a customer's, and this comes back to culture again, what is a customer's, risk tolerance based on these different assets? How do we help them potentially develop prioritization around those different assets so that maybe certain things are more critical than others when we talk about in a piece of equipment or a process line or a particular area or cell? What is the risk tolerance, and how do we provide customers with the ability to leverage context around being able to prioritize those different assets based on that risk tolerance?
Yeah, because it becomes overwhelming quick, right? So when you see this slide, and and we've got new tools that are coming into the space that were designed and purpose built for OT, right? Around this intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, even the network design requirements for this type of environment. And it can be overwhelming, when you put some of these technologies into place, again, that 15-to-1 ratio. And all of a sudden, you're looking at an environment where you've got a couple of thousand or several thousand assets that are unaccounted for traditionally. You have no idea what you're looking at from the standpoint of what's the security posture of that device, what's the profile of it. Now that I know that it's a Rockwell PLC, and I know that it has this version of firmware on it, and I know these are the cards that are in it, and I know what it's talking to and what protocols it's using to and how many downstream devices there are. What does that mean? Because the OT guy, he knows that it makes beer. That's what he knows. Or he knows that it makes paint. Or he's packaging drugs. Whatever it might be doing. But he doesn't know anything else about that device, and the IT guy knows even less about it, right? And so now, so it's difficult. Now they get this large, amount of baseline data of their environment, because all this information has been collected, and machine learning and AI, and it's profiled, and it's telling you all the things that are wrong. Where do you start? And who's responsible for it? And how do you get going on it? Right? And it's a challenge, and we've witnessed it. We've witnessed it, and I grew up in this environment, so it's been interesting from the standpoint of watching the transition, What's even more scary is looking at the faces of people when you put this information in front of them, and they're like, "What the hell am I supposed to do with this?" Right? And so now you got to start making sense of it, and that's where there's groups out there, organizations like ours, and you're going to see this again with the big guys. You're going to see this with Microsoft. You're going to see this with Cisco and Rockwell, and they're all in this game, right? So it's not like you have to go it alone to get the help that you might need in order trying to figure some of this stuff out. All right. So, we have this digital transformation journey, right? So how does it begin? And when you think about your enterprise-wide environment and who the stakeholders are, right? One of the things that we always kind of look at mapping out when we're looking at an organization, when you look at the OT group and you look at the IT group, and you look at who they report to all the way up, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that the first time they have the first same boss is at the CEO of the company, right? That's when you look at with just traditional IT and OT organizations, manufacturing and operations and engineering and IT, the first time they got the same boss is at the very top of the tree. And that's not a conversation you want to have up there, right? About this type of transformation, this journey. And so when you look across what you're doing, when you think about Industry 4.0, and the things that you're gathering and doing, because that is something that's being funded and the business is chasing, it's like, well, how do we get to the digital safety arena? And as you walk down and you look at, the IoT piece, your infrastructure with your network, security, and how is that environment, safety, and then you get into what you're doing with the data at the edge, and there's a lot of people trying to collect that information. What do I need to move up? What needs to stay here? What does not need to be done? So you got to think about edge computing, and you're going to see this from your vendors because they're bringing this technology to the market, and putting it out there further into that environment. Now that you're putting that computing power out there, well, how do you start securing that stuff, right? And who's putting it in and who's responsible for it? Back to the ownership conversation, right? Jim, I'm going to let you kind of walk through a little bit of this slide, if you don't mind, because I know you had a lot to do with putting it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered the main pieces, Dino, right? I mean, the whole point, again, when we talk about, what our customers are ultimately trying to do, they're ultimately trying to do something to collect data and make that data more actionable to make better business decisions, right? What we're trying to show here is we understand that it is a journey that they're ultimately trying to move from connectivity all the way through cognitive analytics and data integration. Obviously, the first piece of that is around connectivity, and we tend, or not we, but people tend to overlook as you're trying to do connectivity and as you're trying to figure out all these different things I'm trying to connect and make data relevant, they kind of forget about the digital safety and cybersecurity piece of that. Really, digital safety and cybersecurity is going to go foundationally across all these pieces. But what we wanted to show here is we understand that the customers are looking for someone to help them build an enterprise-wide vision around a particular business challenge that's enterprise-wide, but then they're also looking for somebody to help them with the first piece of that, which is around data enablement, which we can also then come in and help lay out in a later slide here. We'll show a digital safety journey that kind of is going to, again, be that foundational piece across the enterprise.
Yeah.
Okay, you can go ahead. Perfect.
Yep. So as this journey begins around digital safety, the first thing you want to go after is visibility. Again, what's in the box, right? That's the first thing you want to get your hands around is what do I have out there, and what's connected. You guys have heard the horror stories of certain organizations being hacked because somebody got in through the HVAC PC, right? Well, I can tell you that every manufacturing environment that we go into, we always find gaps and holes in their environment, whether it's ghost assets, which are assets that control systems are trying to talk to that aren't there, external assets that are out on the internet or out in the enterprise somewhere. And why is that happening? Why is that PLC or that HMI talking to a device that's not within the four walls of my plant? And as you look at the framework, which most cybersecurity professionals, whether they're using the NIST framework, this is the National Institute Standards technology on how you identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, MITRE ATT&CK. It's been around for a long time as a very similar framework, sometimes a little bit more focused on the OT space. But you have new players that as you get into the asset profile and what is that profile, and then what are those remediation and mitigation steps, how do you get the key stakeholders aligned, right, to determine, because there could be funding issues or resource issues. Do I have the right partners? Do I need to have different conversations with my partners? Do I need to start having different conversation with my OEMs and SIs that are doing this work independently of most of my other business units, with IT being one of them, and getting that all into the framework of, I want to see continuously what's in the box. Anytime something comes in and out of that box or changes in the box, I want to know what it is. And right now it's invisible to many, many organizations in that space, right? And that's what we specialize in. So when we talk about digital safety, we're talking about going in there and digging into that OT box that most people don't even know what's out there. Even the IT organizations don't fully understand everything that they have. You might have a group of people that are really specialized in packaging, and they're really and within a manufacturing environment, and so they may know that really well, but they don't know what's going on in brewing or in mixing and blending or in utilities, or water, wastewater, whatever other types of process control services they might have. And those are all independent groups. You get into a large automotive plant, and they've got dozens of different little groups that are running, their process area, and they do what they want. They pick the vendors they want, and they decide the technology that they want. And there's no common theme for a very large manufacturer that has different control systems in it. I've seen manufacturers buy brand new laser cutting equipment from Europe that comes with Windows XP still on, right? Just in the past couple of years. Because even for an OS that's end of life by Microsoft, still being sold on the market through machine builders. So it's again, when you get into that digital safety journey, how do you get everybody on the right page? And so the stakeholder platform in that space really has to change.
I'll go back one slide. I want to reinforce something and why we're kind of saying the continuous threat detection and continuous threat monitoring is so critical and kind of towards the end of that digital safety journey. Because a lot of customers, they go, okay, I need to have visibility, and everyone will agree that that's really critical. So what they do is they do an audit, right? And an audit is only going to provide them a snapshot in time based on the assets that are on that particular network at that particular moment. The reason that we're talking about digital safety and really moving towards that continuous piece is because it's critical to understand when a rogue asset comes onto the network. When does a ghost asset happen? When does something come in through the enterprise, drop down into the OT network and move around and create problems in the OT space? That's not going to get captured in an audit trail. You need to have that continuous visibility so that you can actually see. We worked with one customer where there was an event that happened, and we were actually able to show them with the visibility tool sets that we have available where it came in, how it moved across the OT network, so that if we help them move towards the protect phase, we could actually show them how they could put in and connect the tool sets into their firewall policies and things like that to actually stop that from moving or kill that environment or kill that particular situation from happening. That would not have happened if we only did an audit. So it's critically important that people understand as part of digital safety journeys that there's continuous monitoring in place so that you have that visibility of those events happening.
Right. And I'd have to change your SecOps, so if you got a SOC whose job it is, because not, IT has these tools for the business systems and the network and infrastructure that they manage and support, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. They're kind of doing this with the assets that they are responsible for. Now you're just moving another data point into the mix that you can move this data from these new tools from continuous threat up into your SecOps organization and feed them to SIM tools like Splunk or QRadar or your intrusion prevention systems or next generation gateways and firewalls. So IT doesn't have to necessarily learn a whole new technology set. They're just getting new data points that they would kind of treat the same way they would do anything else that's rogue, that's changing in the environment, that needs to be some type of response on, or at least an audit trail and a log for. right? Which today there's nothing for that, right? They're not using anything for that, and IT's not being fed this information. So here we get back to the NIST framework on, and a lot of organizations, and IT organizations, a lot of them use this. I would say most sophisticated IT groups that have a CISO and are charged with, securing their environment have already got the framework in place. All we're saying is we just need to expand it to an area that you haven't done that in the past. And the reason why you haven't done it, one, the availability of these new technologies weren't there, and two, the responsibility wasn't IT's responsibility, or in OT's either, for that matter, right? So their job again was safety and performance, and not necessarily how do I identify events that are going on inside my environment, right? So they would think that IT was doing that, even though the tools and the technology that they have, IT's tools can't see that, right? They're incompatible. Most IT organizations might have 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of security technologies within their charge that they're messing with, that's fragmented, right? So, and some of these new technology companies like a Cisco Systems is providing a breadth of technologies across all of it, from the plant floor network environment all the way up through the enterprise and into the cloud environment, where you can start, if you want to get into an integrated approach, a standard approach, having a one throat to choke model, if you will. So the vendors are starting to come back and bringing that to the forefront, right? And so the question you have to ask yourself today, if you're in the OT guys or the IT guys, what are we doing with this framework today as it relates to my industrial control systems and my industrial Internet of Things environment as I come in? Or even if you're talking to an OEM and an SI who's bringing you to a machine center, a new skid, a new packaging line that you're spending $40 million on, and you sat down and asked them these questions, what would they say to you, right? How would they respond? And those are the types of things that when IT and OT start becoming very collaborative and aligned, there's going to be a lot of emphasis and focus on those OEMs and SIs, maybe to change their behavior and what it is that they're doing. Jim, anything?
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add there, Dino, is there's a lot of tool sets that are out on the market today. One of the things that we found with our best practices, with our engagements with customers, is there isn't one tool set that goes across all of these, right? There's really good tool sets for identifying and detecting. There's really good tool sets with firewall policies and next generation firewalls and IP protection or IPS for response. Really part of what the value we bring is helping the customer as we help them lay out their digital safety journey, bring the best of class platform of tool sets that can encompass every piece of a NIST framework or every piece of a MITRE ATT&CK framework. Because like I said, there isn't going to be one silver bullet, and companies are going to be looking for people to kind of help partner, being able to bring in the right tool sets for the right particular pieces of the framework that they're trying to address.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel either from an OT perspective, right? I mean, the frameworks are out there. It's just a matter of plugging in your data points into this framework and start looking at them from a different perspective than you have in the past, right? Whether it be the snapshot that Jim mentioned earlier with some of the audits that are done. We see that in a lot of regulatory environments. They just want to check the box, come in, tell me that I'm doing okay, do your assessment and audit. I pass, good, check the box, and then they leave. And then whatever happens between then and there is invisible because nobody can see what's going on, right? So as we talk about how Velta goes after that digital safety journey, one of the things that we leverage in the discussion is process integrity, right? We'll talk about security events. Everybody kind of knows what security events are. I mean, IT is really, really good at understanding that, what those security events are and what they mean. But when it comes to process integrity, OT knows that, and they know that really, really well. And so now it's how do you combine that cybersecurity activity and process integrity into the same format on how you can map and track what's going on both sides. So process integrity, give you an example, PLC changes, right? Somebody decides to make a PLC change, download PLC off the PLC, make change to it, and push it back, right? IT would never see it, would know what it means. Most people would mean nothing. some organizations do a really good job of change management control and make sure that, that's not done without going through some significant amount of process activity. Why are you doing it? What's the back out plan? When you're going to do it, who's involved, and you execute and you get it done. A lot of times it's just done right from the hip. Somebody decides to make a change to the control system from a calibration perspective or something they're seeing. Maybe the product type is different, the materials are different, the temperature outside is different, whatever's going on. And so they're manipulating the system, and those can be events that can give you unplanned, unscheduled downtime, right, that people aren't aware of, and it's impacting. And it's done just because, again, culturally, as Jim mentioned earlier, that's just the behavior. That's just what we've always done. All right. So can you imagine if you were bouncing switches all day, every day in the data center just because you felt like putting a patch on, and, or somebody wanted to make a configuration change or do a firmware update and just do it in the middle of the day and do it, in the control system world, and you can get away with that maybe because the impact is short. If somebody has a 30-second outage, not a big deal in the IT world, potentially in most cases. They'll find something else to do for 30 seconds or they'll wait for the screen to come back. In the industrial world, that 30-second outage can cost you $1 million because it can shut down kilns. I've seen it just because somebody unplugged the wrong cable, create a spanning tree loop. And when you have control systems that have very tight tolerances that can't communicate within a period of time, they go safe. And when they go safe, they start shutting down. And you can't stop halfway down when you're bringing down, very large kilns that are up and running. You got to bring them all the way down to the ground. You lose a day, maybe you lose 2 days, right? Millions of dollars just because somebody unplugged the wrong cable, right? And that was something that.
Hi, I'm just going to jump in. You've got a few questions that are coming in too, and I know you've got a few slides left. So I'm just not to interrupt you because that's all so important what you're sharing.
Okay, so I don't know if I really need to touch anything across this process here. I can't see. Delta technology, again, looking at the solution sets from endpoint protection, continuous threat monitoring. These are the things that we bring to the table. Digital safety as a service, the NERC SIP stuff that we do on that front, PINS testing, incident response. So you can see the posture that we provide. These are just, again, our solution sets, part of what we bring to the table. We're an agnostic group. We don't hang our hat necessarily with one vendor perspective. We work with the customer and their requirements and what problems they're trying to solve, and who already maybe their embedded partners are.
There's one particular one I want to really reinforce, just because it seems to be a common theme that's been popping up over the last 6 months, and that is around secure remote access. Right? I mean, people have been doing secure remote access for a long time, just like people have been connecting assets for a long time. The piece that I see more and more customers asking for is not just secure remote access, but secure remote access with audit trail. How can people leverage solution sets that give me the ability to view into what people are doing if I don't like it, or look over the shoulder functionality, or capturing what those changes are and having that audit trail? That seems like that's been something that's been coming up a lot more, that I want people to know that is a critical area that we're being asked about, and that we have different solution sets that we can help you lay out a digital safety journey around that secure remote access with audit trail.
Yeah. It gets back to that process integrity conversation again, and compared to just giving somebody, again, VPN access and open up ports for them. And who knows what kind of protocols they're using or what kind of ports they're after. So yeah, the SRA programs that are coming down the pipe, for OT are going to be really relevant, and something that IT is probably going to have to look hard at. OT is going to be benefiting from them, but I think IT is probably better suited on having to look at these types of tools because it's going to run through their environment to get out there onto the plant floor. So I think this is the last slide, right? So in summary, when you look at some of the characters and the things that have happened, and I'm sure everybody in this webinar has witnessed one of these, if not all of these, in their environment. I know there's many, many more, but when you think about the landscape out there today and what's going on, how do you figure out what's going on in the box? You've got to be able to determine what's in the box, in the OT box, and it's a new activity that organizations are going to have to actively start chasing down and figuring out how to do that. because the tools are here. The technology is available. Now it's a matter of, getting past some of the stonewalling that we see with certain groups that think that we've already got a tool, we're already doing this stuff. It's not. I can't tell you how many times I've seen light bulbs go on the network guy's head when he thinks that some of these tools are just another network management tool, and they're not. When they look at what they're chasing down and the machine learning that they're providing, the baselines that they're building, building out the chassis on a PLC and telling you what's in that PLC, a device that most of them don't even know what they are, and change the entire dynamic of the discussion. So its time has come, and you're going to see a lot of it coming faster and faster. So.
Okay, so we have a few questions that have come in, and I think they're relating to kind of a variety of topics. One person had sent in a question kind of like, if I wanted to get a sense for where vulnerabilities might exist in my current organization, like what's the process to get that done? Like what do I do?
Well, the first thing that we know is visibility. Number one thing is you want to try to do is get visibility into the environment. And when I talk about visibility in the environment, I'm talking about getting to, here's the Purdue model. For those of you, maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. But what we're focused on is the stuff that's down there between level 0 to level 3, right? A lot of times when we work with customers, and if we're talking to the IT guys, and if there's a third party involved managing their infrastructure, they're focused on levels 3 and up, maybe 4 and 5, and these tools that we have, what we're pursuing, we're looking for the stuff down below. So that's what's in the box. What's in the box is level 0 through level 3, right? And so the first thing you want to try to do is understand that network environment. And all of those network environments are different. Some of them are very flat layer 2 networks, big broadcast domains. Some of them are very segmented with a lot of VLANs, and so the question is having a really good understanding of what that network looks like and how it runs out there, so we can bring these new tools into the space to start collecting that baseline and get visibility. That's really the first thing you want to pursue, is get visibility in the environment. Start making sense of what's in the box. I want to see those assets that are out there from level 0 up through level 2, and I want to know what they are, how many of them are, and what are they talking to, and what language are they using, right? Whose vendors equipment is out there.
Yeah, Dino, I'd like to add something to that, because I get this question a lot. One of the questions relating to your comment around visibility, Dino, that I get asked a lot is, hey, what are some of the top things that customers are looking for from a visibility perspective, right? So I know that's kind of probably a next follow-up question that people ask, because I get asked that question a lot. And the ones that tend to be really critical, I'll list off maybe 6, right? One of them is visibility around the CVEs, right? The vulnerabilities, what open ports, what things might have default passwords, who's talking to who. The CVE visibility is something that a lot of customers are looking for, or maybe they don't know that they're looking for that, but they're looking for visibility around something. CVEs is critical, right? One thing that you mentioned is around rogue and ghost assets. That also tends to be something that people are looking for visibility, because they don't realize, hey, when does an iPhone jump on my network? When does some other asset, when I'm doing industrial wireless, pop up on my network? And how do I have visibility around that, or that visibility of an event happening, right? How do I get visibility to my assets as far as how they might be doing as it pertains to network segmentation? That's another critical area. Whereas, I want to have an idea: is my network very flat, or am I doing a really good job with segmenting my industrial assets or my critical process assets from other assets? And then obviously another area is around kind of the services and protocols that are running, right? Those 6 things, or those 5 things, are things that when we talk about visibility, it's not just what is the asset, but what things might be running and how those things might be communicating with other things, and what vulnerabilities do they bring.
Right. And to add into that, it's the behavior too, right? It's like what is normal versus what's an anomaly in the space, right? And so you want to baseline that, right? So when you start creating a baseline and saying this is what's normally normal, and then you know what's normal, and you track and trace that as being such, and then you go, okay, now I want to look for the anomalies, right? Anomalies being a new asset coming into the environment, something changing in the environment, a switch being booted in the middle of the day, that normally you wouldn't see. And some of these tools, I will tell you, they make great referees between the IT and the OT space. That keeps everybody honest. That way, you avoid the finger pointing game. You can really start getting down to saying, okay, let's try to solve some of these problems. And the CVEs that Jim's mentioned, those are common vulnerabilities and exposures for those that maybe didn't catch what that is. And then you also want the advisory that comes from the vendors and or the regulatory groups or the government agencies that are providing that information to you, and then get those mitigation and remediation plans in your hands so you know what you're up against.
Okay, here's another quick one that's around convergence of IT OT. So that someone said you touched on IT and OT convergence. Like, how is that impacting what you walked through today?
So the network is a big one first, right? Because it's getting understanding of that network. So IT has a pretty good idea of what they're responsible for. But the control system network, so when you look at levels 2 and 1 and 0 down there, and some of those are Ethernet networks and sometimes they're not, right? They have the old foundation field bus networks that have been around, Profinet, Profibus, Data Highway, DeviceNet, ControlNet, Modbus, CAN bus, take your pick. And those networks are foreign to most IT organizations, and the responsibility for those usually belong to somebody else. But it doesn't take them out of scope, and it doesn't take them out of our ability in a scope to get down there and get to that information to make sense of it and baseline those assets, right? So so that's information that IT can have, and they need to work together on that, right? And then you have the NIST plan, right? So now that I've identified everything that we should, how do we respond and recover from this environment? How do we do that? So part of it's going to be learning a little bit of operationally, what OT is trying to do day to day to keep their systems up and running,
So here's another one around, like, who typically champions an effort like this across IT or OT, because you're stepping across both areas. I'm assuming that's why someone's curious about that.
Yep. Jim, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, really, there isn't going to be, you saw that in the digital transformation journey slide and also the digital safety slide, there isn't going to be a single point of contact, right? A lot of it is going to be, and this is why these conversations are really important, to have multiple key stakeholders involved in the discussion, right? One person, the IT guy, the CISO, the IT director is going to be looking at something from a certain perspective based on their view of the assets and ownership and culture they're trying to drive. But you're also going to have a lot of those OT people, whether it's a plant manager, or sometimes some of these plants actually have a plant IT person that's responsible for that. So I would tell you that there isn't going to be a key person. There's going to usually be a group of people. And part of our job when we work with customers is to help prompt that conversation across the different people based on that company's culture, right? Yeah, go ahead, Dino.
I was going to say, I would add risk to that too, right? So, if you have risk compliance groups, and other regulatory compliance people and or just a risk organization, they're another key component in this discussion, right, that need to be brought to the table. So it varies by company, really. It just depends on, the organizational layout and the strength of one group over another, and the money and how they budget and plan. And so it definitely takes a village. I'll put it that way. It's a village. It's not a single person, unless you want to put the CEO, make it his responsibility. But like I said, if you get up to that point, you probably got other issues at that realm. It's just organizationally, their priorities are different. Their money comes from different buckets. It's just it's got to be worked out between these IT and OT teams.
Yeah, the CEO is probably involved at the point there's been a cybersecurity breach and they're in big trouble. Yeah.
And then everybody's in trouble. But it's usually IT that catches the brunt of it, right?
Right.
And it could have came from OT, but they're not really necessarily sure how it morphed its way into the environment. We've seen it. I mean, we've seen that stuff, languishing out there, and nobody knows it until you put some of these tools in there, and it gives them a chance at least to fight back, right? And then that's really what we're after, is It's giving them what they need to fight back.
So here's a bit of a related question. So what makes you think that this OT security issue is more important than other security issues in IT OT?
Well, OT is usually the cash register, right? That's how the company makes their money. You know, when OT is not running, the company's not making money. So OT security is very, very relevant compared to IT, right? In that process. So when you think about it from a money standpoint, it's like unplanned, unscheduled downtime. It literally costs hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour for unscheduled, unplanned downtime. In the discrete environment, you know, it's $70,000 to $80,000 an hour when you're not making goods. And you can't, there's no time capsule to get into, you know, to make up for that. You're paying salaries, you've got material loss, you've got resources you've consumed, you got trucks at the docks that are backed up and waiting. You know, there's a whole plethora of things that just, it's a ripple effect, a chain reaction when the plant floor is down, and it's a priority. You know,
I'd like to add a little bit to that, Dino, right? Because one of the things, you had a slide up that showed kind of the 4 key pillars of digital safety. Let's not overlook IP theft, right? I mean, when I was at Cisco, we were having conversations with customers. You know, if you Google the Ford truck and the Chinese Ford truck, you'll see that they're exactly identical, right? So don't forget, yes, downtime and things like that, the cash register and the company and how they generate money is critical. But let's not forget about things like IP theft and how customers, you know, if Anheuser-Busch has optimized the beer packaging line and someone wants to build a new packaging line, are they better to start from scratch, or are they better to go steal from somebody who's already done it and leverage that and reduce their time to market? That's a critical piece. Health, you know, if you talk about like the German steel company, that when someone got in and shut the facility down and it burned down the whole hot end of the steel plant, there were people that were hurt. So it's not just the downtime issue, it's multiple factors, and that's why we had that one slide array around the key pillars, because there are multiple aspects that touch the OT space that I think it's very important for people to understand. It's not just a downtime or performance issue. It touches a lot of different factors.
Right. Environmental being another one, right? You know, to have environmental damage, right? If you're having to dump or flare off gases and or dump materials, you know, in and around communities, you know, the safety, you know, people getting hurt, you know, loss of life. So when you think about digital safety, again, getting back to security between OT and IT, it's a bit different. It really is from that standpoint.
So we are almost out of time. So I want to give an opportunity here for if folks want to get started with a digital safety plan or to get visibility into where their vulnerabilities lie, like what's the best way for them to engage with you guys?
Start a conversation, you know. Let's talk about, you know, what you're trying to get done. You know, let's talk about your environment. You know, what kind of assets do you have, and what technologies are you using today? You know, who are you working with? We do pilots. You know, we come in and do proof of concepts with some of these technologies. We also do consulting. So the first step is just trying to get an idea of the challenges that you're trying to resolve. You know, especially if it's related to any of these things on the left, if you've dealt with it, you know, because, you know, if you're dealing with the loss of or business disruption or unplanned, unscheduled downtime or damages to equipment, or just don't have the metrics and KPIs to your OT environment, you know, that's a good start.
Perfect. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This was really informative. You know, thank you guys so much for sharing all the wisdom, experience, and all of that. And I, you know, just trust that folks will be sending out this recording, so you'll have a chance to view it again if you wanted. And we'll be following up with everyone. If you had questions that we didn't get to, I know there were a couple we didn't get to, you know, feel free to message us, and we'll follow up with a one-on-one response.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.